You've heard the name, Genghis Khan, the man who forged the largest single land empire in the history of the world. It's a name that conjures images of unstoppable armies, a brilliant strategist, a unifier of a nation. But that's only half the story. The comfortable half. What if I told you that his greatest weapon wasn't his cavalry, or the composite bow, or even the sheer size of his horde? What if his most effective, most devastating weapon was terror itself? This is the story of how one man turned the systematic annihilation of entire civilizations into a calculated instrument of war. How he unleashed a campaign of brutality so vast and so absolute that it scarred the demographics of the world and left a wound on human memory that has never faded. This isn't a story about simple conquest. It's a story about erasure. Now, the title of this video uses the word sport. Let's be clear, Genghis Khan didn't line up civilians for some gruesome game. The sport was the hunt, the conquest, the utter subjugation of anyone who dared stand against him. The destruction wasn't just a byproduct of war, it was the entire point. For him, victory wasn't partial. As one historian puts it, it was complete, total, and undeniable, or it was nothing. In his world, there was no room for rivals, no mercy for the defiant. The burning of cities and the fates of their women were just moves on a continental chessboard where the only rule was to win, absolutely. To understand the man who would burn the world, you first have to understand the world that burned him. Our story begins not with a Khan, but with a boy named Temujin, born sometime around 1162. His early life, as told in the secret history of the Mongols, a remarkable and semi-legendary chronicle written for the Mongol royal family, is a brutal tale of survival. This isn't a verified biography in the modern sense, but it's a foundational epic, a glimpse into how the Mongols saw themselves and their great founder. According to this tradition, Temujin was born clutching a clot of blood in his fist, a sign, people said, that he was destined for greatness. But his path was anything but blessed. When he was just 9, his father, a minor chieftain named Yasuji, was allegedly poisoned by a rival Tatar tribe. While this is a key part of Mongol tradition, it isn't verified by outside sources. With his father gone, Temujin's own clan abandoned him, his mother, and his siblings, casting them out onto the harsh Mongolian steppe to fend for themselves. The years that followed were a crucible of hardship. He scavenged for food, hunted, and learned the bitter lessons of betrayal and powerlessness. It's during this time that one of the most infamous stories of his youth is said to have happened: the killing of his own half-brother, Begtur, in a dispute over a hunting prize. Whether this is literal fact or an allegorical tale, it illustrates a core principle that would define his life. Threats must be eliminated completely and without hesitation. His struggles only got worse. He was captured and enslaved by a rival clan, forced to wear a kang, a heavy wooden collar, and a symbol of ultimate humiliation. But Temujin wasn't one to remain captive. In a daring escape, he's said to have hidden submerged in a river, with only his nostrils above the water, before finding his freedom. This period of his life was also marked by a profound personal loss that would echo through his future campaigns. His young wife, Borte, was kidnapped by the rival Merkit tribe. Temujin, with the help of allies, eventually rescued her after she'd been held for what some sources claim was around 8 months. She returned pregnant, and the son she later bore, Joki, would forever live under the shadow of questionable paternity. While Genghis Khan always claimed Joki as his firstborn, the doubt became a political fault line, a tension that underscored a deep-seated belief: to be unable to protect what is yours, especially your family, is the ultimate failure. These events, his father's death, the betrayal by his clan, the humiliation of slavery, and his wife's abduction, weren't just tragic episodes. They were the forge. They hammered a boy into a man who believed that loyalty was everything, that mercy was a luxury he couldn't afford, and that the only true security lay in the absolute destruction of one's enemies. He wouldn't just defeat his rivals, he would erase their ability to ever threaten him again. This philosophy, born in the unforgiving wilderness, would soon be unleashed upon the entire known world. The transition from a struggling tribal leader to the conqueror of the world was built on a simple, terrifying principle: submit or be destroyed. This wasn't a threat, it was a business model. For Genghis Khan, Terror wasn't an emotional outburst of rage. It was a calculated, systematic tool of statecraft. Entire cities, centers of culture and commerce that had stood for centuries, were about to learn this lesson in the most brutal way imaginable. The catalyst for the Mongols' devastating westward expansion was a colossal miscalculation. It happened in the frontier city of Otrar, part of the powerful Khwarezmian Empire. In 1218, Genghis Khan sent a trade caravan to the city. The governor, a man named Inalchuk, was suspicious and greedy. He accused the merchants of being spies, seized their goods, and had them all killed. Genghis Khan, ever the pragmatist, sent a second diplomatic mission. He dispatched 3 envoys to the court of the Khwarezmian ruler, Shah Muhammad II, demanding the governor be punished. The Shah's response was one of staggering arrogance. According to historical accounts, he had the envoys maimed and killed, a grave insult. In doing so, Shah Muhammad II didn't just doom a city, he signed the death warrant for his entire empire. The invasion that followed was unlike anything the world had ever seen. The Mongol war machine fell upon the Khwarezmian Empire with breathtaking speed and ferocity. Our first stop is Bokhara, a jewel of the Silk Road. When the Mongols arrived in 1220, the city's garrison tried to fight its way out and was annihilated. The city's leaders, hoping for mercy, surrendered. Genghis Khan is said to have gathered the city's elite in the main mosque, where he reportedly delivered his most famous line. Climbing the pulpit, he allegedly declared, "I am the punishment of God. If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you." Now, most scholars believe this quote was a later invention to dramatize the event, but it perfectly captures the psychological shock of the invasion. The city was looted and much of it burned. True to Mongol pragmatism, artisans and craftsmen were spared, their skills deemed useful. They were rounded up and sent back east. The rest of the able-bodied men were conscripted into the Mongol army, often to be used as human shields in the next siege. Next came Samarkand, another titan of Central Asia. It was a fortress city of immense wealth and prestige. The Shah had made a fatal error, spreading his massive army across his cities instead of facing the Khan in one decisive battle. This allowed the Mongols to destroy his forces piecemeal. After a brief siege, a faction in Samarkand negotiated a surrender, opening the gates. It was a false hope. The garrison was executed, and the city was plundered. A pattern emerged. Persian chroniclers reported that 30,000 artisans were spared for their skills, while another 30,000 men were conscripted. The rest of the population was driven onto a plain outside the city, where a horrific massacre took place. But the fate of Bokhara and Samarkand paled in comparison to what awaited cities that offered fierce resistance. For them, the Mongol response wasn't subjugation, but obliteration. Gurganj, or Urgench, the empire's capital, was next. The siege was long, and the fighting was house to house. When the city finally fell, the slaughter was methodical. The survivors were marched out of the city, and the historian Giovanni, writing a generation later, deployed a chilling literary device to describe the scale of the killing. He claimed each of the 50,000 Mongol soldiers was ordered to execute 24 people. This calculation, leading to a death toll of over 1 million, wasn't a literal census. It was a way of saying, they killed everyone. To complete the city's demise, some accounts claim the Mongols even diverted the Amu Darya River to flood the ruins, wiping Gurganj from the face of the earth. While it's a powerful story, the river's course has changed for many reasons over the centuries, so this remains a debated part of the legend. And then there was Nishapur. The fate of this Persian city has become a benchmark for human cruelty. During the siege in 1221, Genghis Khan's son-in-law, Takuchur, was killed by an arrow from the city walls. When news reached Genghis Khan and his daughter, Takuchur's widow, Nishapur's fate was sealed. Revenge would be absolute. What followed was not a battle, but an extermination. According to the later Persian chronicles, which supply the most horrific details, the order was given that no one should be left alive, not even the city's cats and dogs, so that Takuchur's widow could witness a city utterly devoid of life. The casualty figures from these chronicles are staggering, a reported 1.7 million people. Historians today don't see this as a literal headcount, but as a chronicler's attempt to articulate total annihilation. The most gruesome parts of the legend claim that, to ensure no one was feigning death, every man, woman, and child was decapitated, and that enormous pyramids of their skulls were built as a ghastly monument. Whether these pyramids literally stood or were a terrifying literary trope, the message was the same and served a clear strategic purpose: psychological warfare on an epic scale. The stories of these massacres, carried by the few who were deliberately allowed to escape, traveled faster than their armies. The message to the next city was unambiguous: surrender means tribute, resistance means oblivion. The Mongol art of war went beyond destroying cities. Perhaps their most chilling innovation was how they turned people themselves into instruments of conquest. One of their most notorious tactics was the use of the karash, or human shields. While not a new invention in warfare, the Mongols applied it on a systematic and terrifying scale. When they approached a city, they would first sweep through the countryside, capturing thousands of local peasants and villagers. These unfortunate captives became the front line. They were forced to do the most dangerous work, filling in defensive moats, carrying ladders to the walls, and absorbing the first volley of arrows and boiling oil from the defenders. It was a tactic designed to break not just the defenses, but the will to fight. For the soldiers on the walls, it was a horrific choice: kill their own countrymen, or let the Mongol warriors advance unharmed. This use of captured populations also extended into the very heart of society, targeting the one thing that ensures a culture's survival: its women. The aftermath of a Mongol victory was almost always followed by systematic abduction and enslavement. Now, some have framed this as a deliberate policy of biological warfare, but that's probably applying a modern concept to a medieval practice. There's no evidence of a formal, written-down doctrine for demographic engineering, but the effects of these actions were undeniably demographic and socially catastrophic, and it's hard to believe this was entirely accidental. When a city fell, its women were treated as spoils of war. This was common in the 13th century, but the Mongols pursued it with a unique organizational zeal. Women were sorted and distributed. The wives and daughters of defeated rulers were often claimed by Genghis Khan or his commanders. This was a reward for the warriors, but it was also a profound act of humiliation, symbolically breaking the enemy's lineage. It was the ultimate expression of the belief forged in Temujin's youth: a man who can't protect his women doesn't deserve to rule. A stark example is Turkan Khatan, the powerful mother of Shah Muhammad II. After being captured, her power and influence were utterly extinguished, and she died soon after. For the countless ordinary women, their fate was often slavery. They were divided among the soldiers, forced into domestic and sexual servitude. Those with valuable skills, like weavers or musicians, might be sent to the Mongol capital not as honored guests, but as living tools to serve the empire. The sheer scale of these abductions shattered families, erased bloodlines, and tore apart the social fabric. While Mongol-born women, especially in the elite, enjoyed a remarkable degree of freedom for their time, this was not extended to the women they conquered. These actions were a consistent outcome of every Mongol victory. It was a methodical dismantling of an enemy's future. By taking the women, the Mongols didn't just seize property, they seized the means of cultural and biological reproduction, ensuring that the conquered people could not easily rise again. If you look at the Mongol campaigns as a whole, a clear and terrifying logic emerges. The massacres, the human shields, the enslavement of women, these weren't disconnected acts of cruelty. They were integrated parts of a sophisticated strategy of psychological warfare. Genghis Khan understood something profound. The fear of pain can be a more powerful motivator than pain itself. A reputation for atrocity could conquer more cities than his army ever could. This strategy was built on a binary choice presented to every kingdom in their path: submission or annihilation. When a Mongol army arrived, it often began by destroying the surrounding countryside, cutting off the city's food supply, and creating a flood of terrified refugees who brought with them first-hand accounts of Mongol brutality. The choice was then formalized: surrender without a fight, accept a Mongol governor, and pay tribute. In return, your city would be spared. Resistance meant it would be made into a demonstration piece. The Goryeo dynasty in Korea, for example, eventually became a vassal state, but only after decades of brutal conflict and resistance, not a simple surrender. The Mongols were masters of making sure their terrifying stories spread, often deliberately letting a few survivors escape a massacre to serve as their most effective propaganda. Another key element of this psychological warfare was the destruction of the very means of life. In the arid lands of Persia and Central Asia, civilization depended on sophisticated underground irrigation channels known as qanats. The Mongol campaigns caused immense, localized destruction to this vital infrastructure. This was a blow against the future, ensuring that even if a city was rebuilt, the surrounding land would be barren, making recovery incredibly difficult. This calculated approach to terror may have even been reflected in their law. The Great Yasa, the legal code of the Mongols, is a mysterious document. No original copy survives. While it prescribed harsh punishments for crimes within Mongol society, our fragmentary knowledge of it, often filtered through hostile sources, makes it hard to say what it codified about foreign policy. It's speculative, but the Mongol response to the killing of their envoys suggests that any harm done to them was seen as a capital offense against the entire state, justifying total war. Ultimately, the Mongol military genius lay in this fusion of physical and psychological warfare. They were brilliant on the battlefield, but their greatest insight was that a battle won in the mind of the enemy was a battle that didn't have to be fought at all. By making the consequences of resistance so unimaginably horrific, they turned fear into their primary weapon. When we look back at history's great conquerors, Alexander, Caesar, Napoleon, we often see a dual legacy of destruction and construction. Genghis Khan's legacy is different. He was a nation builder for his own people, the Mongols, uniting them and ordering the adoption of a script for their language. But in the lands he conquered, his primary legacy was absence. His son and successor, Ogdi, would later establish a capital at Karakoram, but Genghis Khan's own focus was not on building, but on securing control. His most controversial legacy may be written not in stone, but in our very DNA. In 2003, a genetic study identified a unique Y chromosome lineage that's unusually widespread across Asia. This star cluster lineage is found in roughly 8% of men in a vast region from the Pacific to the Caspian Sea, meaning it's carried by about 16 million men today. Researchers traced its origin to a single ancestor who likely lived in Mongolia about 1,000 years ago. Its incredible spread couldn't be random. It had to be the result of a line of men who enjoyed immense reproductive success for generations. The most obvious candidate was Genghis Khan, whose dynasty ruled this exact territory and whose male descendants maintained vast harems. It was a stunning hypothesis, the genetic shadow of one man's dynasty, written into the human genome. However, as science evolves, this theory has been complicated. More recent studies, including DNA from elite Mongol graves, have revealed other powerful genetic lineages that also spread rapidly in Asia. While this star cluster is real, attributing it exclusively to Genghis Khan is a fascinating hypothesis, but it remains unproven. Still, the theory forces us to confront the Mongol conquest in its starkest terms. If even partially true, it means the systematic taking of women had a biological outcome of unprecedented scale. The sheer death toll of the invasions is also debated. The massive numbers recorded by medieval chroniclers, like 40 million dead, are now seen as rhetorical figures, a pre-modern way of saying uncountably many. Even so, the evidence points to one of the most violent periods in human history. Some scholars argue that certain devastated regions, where critical irrigation was destroyed, were set back for centuries, though this is debated as many factors shaped their long-term history. What is undeniable is that the Mongol conquests didn't just change the maps, they created a demographic crater in the heart of Eurasia. So how do we remember Genghis Khan? The man who rose from an outcast to the master of the largest land empire in history. The leader who unified his people and secured trade routes so effectively that a later proverb claimed a maiden could walk the empire's length with a gold nugget on her head without fear. This is the narrative of the great unifier. But it is a narrative written over the ashes of countless cities and the unmarked graves of millions. His brutality wasn't the senseless rage of a barbarian. It was cold, calculated, and terrifyingly effective. He turned terror into a policy, destruction into a message, and people into weapons. The burning of cities was a central strategy. The mass abduction of women was an integral part of a system aimed at breaking an enemy's spirit, lineage, and future. He created a world where the choice was simple: kneel, or be erased. For those who knelt, there was the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace. For those who resisted, there was the Mongol storm, a hurricane of violence that swept away entire civilizations. The title of this video calls him the conqueror who burned cities and killed women for sport. This sport was the grand, terrible game of empire, and these were his methods for winning. His legacy is a chilling testament to the fact that sometimes in history, the line between a visionary nation builder and a mass murderer isn't a line at all. It's simply a matter of perspective, whether you're standing inside the walls of his empire or buried beneath them. What do you think? Was Genghis Khan a civilizing force or one of history's greatest monsters? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to explore more of the dark and complex figures of history, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching.